People had to get creative with their meals even when the relations between the US and the USSR were all frosty. Here are 20 Cold War-era foods we'll make appreciate every bite of what's on your plate. The list kicks off with the ultimate main course of any Cold War pantry, government-issued all-purpose survival crackers. These biscuits were specifically designed for fallout shelters by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the 60s. The clock was ticking, and things could have gone nuclear at any minute during the war, so people packed ahead for a stay underground. Now, this snack didn't necessarily make the stay cozy, but these crackers made sure people had something to fill their tummies with. They were nutritious and built to last with an incredibly long shelf life. It was made from bulgur, a Mediterranean staple made from parboiled whole grains known as groats that had been consumed for thousands of years by everyone from Chinese emperors to ancient Babylonians. These crackers soon became the nation's favorite doomsday snack. Yeah, that's what everyone called it. Next time you're enjoying some Ritz crackers, picture them as your go-to meal for the entire day. So, multi-purpose food became the talk of the town during the Cold War era. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, the world was a tense place with geopolitical standoffs and nuclear jitters. Amidst this chaos, governments were preparing for every scenario, from canned beans and powdered milk to canned tuna and frozen vegetables. The government was coming up with all kinds of survival foods. These meals had to be nutritious and long-lasting as they were rationed and stored underground in case of emergencies. The Cold War era was the start of a lot of new trends, including MREs, meals ready to eat. I'm sure you haven't had a single trip to the grocery store without walking past the big Lunchables display. Well, MREs were like the OG Lunchables of the 60s. They were originally designed for the military but eventually found their way into civilian hands. These meals were a staple during the tough days of the war and were designed to be a complete meal in a bag. Everything from beef stew to pasta, all ready to go with just a bit of water and heat. Nowadays, people eat these meals out of convenience, but during the war, they were one of the few options available. These might not have been Michelin star-level meals, but MREs were the true heroes back in the day. Don't we all love a sunny side up? Well, try pairing it with jam because it will surely bring back some post-Cold War nostalgia. Now, you were probably not even born when fried eggs with jam were all the rage, but your grandparents must have memories of this meal. Eggs were one of the first foodstuffs to disappear at the beginning of the Second World War. But the Soviet authorities were quick to find a solution in the powdered eggs provided by the US under the 1942 Lend-Lease program. Yeah, you heard that right. Powdered eggs. As you can imagine, people had all sorts of reactions to powdered eggs initially because what kind of world didn't have something as basic as eggs to offer? But soon everyone realized that the world wasn't doomed, and powdered eggs were a blessing in disguise. We'll talk more about them later in the video because, believe it or not, they were a whole meal on their own. The jam was usually homemade, whipped in the autumn after the ripe berries and fruit had been picked at holiday homes and farms. It's the kind of food combo where you throw together two random pantry items and end up with a masterpiece. Cold War meals weren't all about multi-purpose food and eggs. We had some meat options too, and Spam was the star of the meat aisle. No discussion of the foods of war would be complete without exploring the tinned meat that America loves to hate. Spam was launched in 1937 by Hormel Foods and marketed as a way for Great Depression-era families to put meat on the table. So it's only fair it made a comeback around the Cold War days. Spam was a staple ingredient in pretty much every dish, from Spam sandwiches to Spam burgers and even Spam fried rice. This canned meat was a mainstay, it was easy to stockpile, had a long shelf life, and wasn't too expensive. A fan favorite during the war was Spam sandwiches. They were easy, fast, and fulfilling. What more can you ask for? All you needed to add was a slice of Spam inside 2 slices of bread, and wham! Meal accomplished. Speaking of meat options, Vienna sausages were little canned sausages that were often eaten straight from the can, with no cooking required. Vienna sausages were made out of meat, pork, and chicken, so they really were the triple threat of meaty foods during the war days. These were a must-have in emergency stockpiles. The best part? They could be served cold or at room temperature, so no heating was required. During the Cold War, people used to prepare for the worst. Now, it could have been challenging to access heat and electricity if things went south, especially in cases of emergency, which made these bad boys a go-to snack. People found heaps of Vienna sausages stocked underground along with piles of canned Spam. Love them or hate them, they added much-needed variety to the war foods. Everyone loves a classic peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but have you ever tried a cracker and peanut butter sandwich? Let's be real. Crackers were everywhere during the nuclear standoff, so people had to get creative and come up with all sorts of recipes. The cracker and peanut butter sandwich was a creation of these desperate times, but its taste really spoke for itself. Did you know that the classic peanut butter and jelly sandwich was also created during the tough days of World War I? You know what they say? Every cloud has a silver lining. This combo was a lifesaver in a time when convenience and nutrition were key. This meal was portable and required no cooking like most of the Cold War-era foods. Food rationing and limited access to cooking facilities made simple, shelf-stable meals a practical choice. And this snack was just that. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of powdered eggs. I know you've been dying to know more about this scientific phenomenon. So a powdered egg is a fully dehydrated egg. You know those freeze-dried candies you really like? They were basically the same thing, only made with eggs. Most powdered eggs were made using spray drying in the same way that powdered milk is made. These were rehydrated with water to make scrambled eggs or used in baking. The crazy part? These powdered eggs were even healthier than your basic ones. They contained almost every nutritional benefit known to mankind, minus the pathogens and fats in real eggs that weakened the body. The major advantages of powdered eggs over fresh eggs are the reduced weight per volume of whole egg equivalent and the shelf life. Here's the thing. Real eggs require refrigeration, and with everything at stake during the Cold War, we couldn't rely on electricity to keep our food options open. While they weren't quite the same as fresh eggs, powdered eggs got the job done. Here's a sad truth about vegetables. They quickly become soggy and spoil. Well, this was a big problem during the Cold War days, and that resulted in the invention of canned vegetables with vinegar. When it came to preserving vegetables, adding vinegar was a game changer. The acidity helped preserve the veggies and added a tanginess that gave the vegetables much-needed flavor. It was a way to make sure that even if fresh produce was hard to come by, you still had something to add to your meals. The Brits really loved this one. This era also saw pickles skyrocket in popularity, while canned vegetables became a must-have staple in every grocery store. These are still a hit for those who love their veggies a little sour. Vinaigrette was a traditional Cold War-era salad. So the Russians weren't just leading the space race by sending Yuri Gagarin into orbit, they were also 2 steps ahead with their delicious meals. But if you really want to get into the history of this classic, it's the French who really deserve the credit. At the end of the 18th century, when French chefs began arriving in Russia, few could find apprentices who understood them well. These peasants introduced a great deal of confusion and inaccuracy into their masters' recipes, and as a result, vinaigrette was born. While the name originates from the French dressing vinaigrette, in Russia it was attached to the dish that used it as a dressing. During the Cold War, this dish was simplified further. The meat was all but eliminated, leaving only sauerkraut, beets, and pickles, and the intricate French dressing was replaced with sunflower oil. But don't let its simple ingredients fool you. It still tasted like a culinary masterpiece. No Cold War pantry was complete without a can of beans and a pack of hot dogs, the classic combo. Before burgers and fries claimed their spot as the ultimate food pairing, hot dogs and beans were the unbeatable duo that ruled the meal scene. Baked beans were among the first canned convenience foods to emerge in the United States, dating back to the Civil War. This meal was all anyone could ask for during the tough days of the war. Easy to prepare, packed with protein, and finger-licking good. What's not to love? Yeah, this one was really a lifesaver for the lazy ones. Canned beans and hot dogs were perfect for a quick filling meal that didn't require much effort. You could heat it up on a stove or eat it straight from the can if you were really in a pinch. When the weather turned cold, Nothing warmed the soul like a bowl of ration stew. You heard that correctly? This Cold War meal was made with canned meat, potatoes, and vegetables, and was a go-to for those looking to stretch their rations. This meal was all about making use of whatever was on hand, which meant every batch was unique from the last one. Interestingly, this throw-it-together approach was not just practical, but also turned into a bit of a culinary challenge, with families trying to outdo each other in creating the most delicious or inventive version of the stew from limited supplies. This dinner meal didn't just provide a good, hearty meal during wartime, but also came up with a side of fun and quality time with the fam. No food in the 60s had people coming back for seconds, quite like the evaporated milk pudding. It was a popular dessert due to its affordability and unique taste. The Cold War era was all about using science to make the most out of the most basic food items. Evaporated milk was basically a canned dairy product with about 60% of its water removed. This gave it a longer shelf life than that of regular milk. This dessert was popular in the United States and other Western countries as a practical solution to wartime rationing and post-war food shortages. This one was whipped up by mixing evaporated milk with sugar, cornstarch, and flavorings such as vanilla or cocoa powder. The mixture was then cooked until it thickened into a creamy, custard-like consistency. Now, since grandmas were the ones who made this, it also became known as Meemaw's milk pudding. For a dessert made without relying on fresh milk, this one was a real winner. So, borscht in a jar was an Eastern European delicacy that became very popular during the post-World War II era. As the name suggests, this soup was served in a jar and was made up of beets, cabbage, and sometimes meat. Canned Spam was one of the most common meats used for this soup. In the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries, where borscht was a traditional dish, this jar of warmth became essential for maintaining food security throughout harsh winters and periods of scarcity. Borscht in a jar allowed households to enjoy this beloved soup all year long, even when fresh ingredients were not readily available. This meal started a trend of families sealing jars of all kinds of different stews, soups, and gravies. Ever heard of eating pancakes with seafood? Well, blini with canned fish made it possible back in the 1960s. You know how you eat waffles and chicken? This was a simpler and Cold War-era version of the fan favorite. Blini were thin, delicate pancakes that have been a staple in Russian cuisine for centuries. During the Cold War, these little guys took on a new twist when paired with canned fish. Why? Because canned fish was readily available and had a long shelf life, perfect for times when fresh ingredients were hard to come by. The pancakes themselves are made from a simple batter of flour, eggs, milk, and a touch of salt. This dish originated in coastal areas of Russia, but made its way around the globe as canned fish wasn't difficult to transport. Of course, this list wouldn't be complete without pickled vegetables. I know what you're thinking. Aren't canned veggies with vinegar and picked vegetables pretty much the same thing? They are both methods of preserving the greens, but pickled veggies have way more flavor than old-fashioned vinegar and vegetables. Canned vegetables with vinegar involve cooking vegetables and then sealing them in jars with vinegar-based brine, while the process of pickling involves soaking vegetables in a mixture of vinegar, salt, and spices. With fresh produce sometimes being hard to come by, pickling offered a way to keep veggies available and flavorful. Commonly pickled vegetables during the Cold War included cucumbers, beets, and carrots. These vegetables were often enjoyed as a side dish or added to salads and sandwiches. Pickled cucumbers are to this day loved just as much, if not more, by many households in America. Sterlet soup is another Russian delicacy that made the Cold War days 100 times tastier. Sterlet is a type of sturgeon, and its meat was known for its unique texture and flavor. Ever wondered what the world's most powerful leaders got to eat when they went for dinner at the Kremlin in the 60s and 70s? If you guessed sterlet soup, you're correct. This soup is typically a clear broth-based soup featuring chunks of sterlet fish along with vegetables such as onions, carrots, and potatoes. Now, this wasn't your average fish soup. It took all the time and effort one could give, which made it a luxury during times when convenience was prioritized. So far, we've talked about canned soups and soups in jars, so it's only fair we have a full circle moment with dehydrated soup mixes. These mixes took up much less space than canned soup for the quantity you can get, which made it a real star during the Cold War. Plus, the cost per serving was less than canned soup, and all you needed to do was add water to prepare it. Dehydrated soup mixes typically came in packets or cans and included a variety of flavors such as chicken noodles, vegetables, and beef stew. The process of dehydration involved removing moisture from the soup ingredients, allowing them to be stored for extended periods without refrigeration. These soups were a lifesaver for busy families or anyone looking for a quick meal. Last but certainly not least, we have baked beans with molasses. Let's get it straight. Baked beans are the ultimate comfort food, but during the Cold War, they were given a sweet twist with the addition of molasses. Now, I'm not complaining because this is definitely a match made in culinary heaven. Baked beans were typically made with navy beans, cooked in a sauce made from molasses, brown sugar, and sometimes bacon or pork. Sounds delicious, right? The molasses in baked beans was more than just a sweetener. It helped to preserve the beans. Beans are a good source of protein, fiber, and essential nutrients. The molasses add some additional nutrients, such as iron and calcium, making the dish not only tasty, but also relatively nutritious. This one is still a classic street food in Boston and a common side dish at barbecues, picnics, and other casual gatherings. So, which of these Cold War foods would you have loved? Let us know in the comments. If you liked the video, give us a like and subscribe.